The laughter stopped mid-air. Crystal glasses froze halfway to polished lips. From the center of the ballroom, a small voice pierced the golden silence. "She's my mom!" Heads turned. Stunned guests stared at the little boy standing on a velvet chair, pointing across the room, not at a guest, not at the bride, but at a woman in a faded uniform, her hands trembling, her eyes wide with fear and something deeper, truth. Just hours earlier, Grace Holloway had been invisible, as she always was. In a house filled with crystal chandeliers, imported orchids, and people who never said her name, she moved like a shadow, quiet, careful, there to make sure the real guests were fed, entertained, and undisturbed. It was Noah's 7th birthday, a grand celebration thrown by Benjamin Crawford, tech mogul, billionaire, and father of the boy. But Grace wasn't there as a guest. She was the help, the babysitter, the one with calloused hands and shoes worn thin. She didn't expect a thank you. She didn't expect kindness. All she wanted was to make sure Noah smiled, to stand in the back and watch him blow out the candle she baked at dawn. But what she got was humiliation. This is the story of how she was broken in front of everyone, and how one child's love changed everything. But she had no idea what was coming next. Grace Holloway had never belonged to places like this. She didn't speak the language of art dealers and hedge fund wives, of summered in the Hamptons and my driver's late. But she understood children, and Noah, sweet, gentle Noah, had understood her back. She'd been hired when he was barely 2. His mother, a quiet woman with sad eyes, had passed away a few months after his birth. Benjamin Crawford, his father, had buried himself in work. He built empires in silence, while Grace hummed lullabies in the nursery, fixed broken toy trucks, and taught Noah how to tie his shoes. At first, Benjamin barely noticed her. She was efficient, calm, invisible, everything rich people liked in someone they paid to care for their kids. But Noah noticed, he always did. "Don't leave, Gracie," he whispered every night as she tucked him in. "I won't," she always answered. And she meant it. Now at this glittering birthday party, attended by senators, CEOs, and magazine editors, Grace hovered near the dessert table in her plain black uniform, holding a small plate of cupcakes she'd decorated herself. Noah loved the blue ones with stars. She made extra. That's when the laughter started. Did someone invite the maid to the party? Grace turned her head. A group of women in pastel dresses stood near the champagne fountain, their lips curled in fake smiles. Veronica Langston, tall, blonde, sharp as broken glass, was at the center of it. "She looks like she got lost on the way to the service entrance," Veronica said loudly, eyes locked on Grace. Grace felt her cheeks flush. She lowered her gaze and stepped back, bumping into a server who offered no apology. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept walking, quiet, careful, like always. She didn't cry, not yet. But inside, something began to crack. She found a quiet spot near the hallway to the kitchen, hoping no one would see her. All she wanted was for Noah to enjoy his day, to see him smile. But across the ballroom, Veronica smirked and began walking toward her. That was the moment everything started to unravel. Grace used to dream, a long time ago, not about riches or applause, but about being enough for someone, about holding her son without guilt, without hiding. Because years before she was a nanny, she had been a mother. At 17, abandoned by her family and shamed for an unplanned pregnancy, she gave birth in a crowded public hospital. With nowhere to go and no one to help, she signed papers she barely understood. The adoption agency called it mercy. She called it surrender. Years passed. She rebuilt herself in kitchens, in late-night bus rides, in silence, until fate brought her to the Crawfords. To Noah. She knew the moment she saw him. Same almond eyes, same tiny birthmark on his right hand. But she said nothing, just smiled and took the job. If God wouldn't give her back her child, maybe he'd let her love him from a distance. And he had. For 5 years, Grace raised him in secret, not as mother, but as something in between. At the party, as balloons floated and jazz played softly under the chandeliers, Grace clutched a tray of star-top cupcakes and watched Noah laugh near the magician. Her heart felt full, even if it could never be complete. Then Veronica struck. "Oh, look at that," she said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Even the nanny's trying to get some attention now. How quaint." Grace froze. She stood near the buffet, unsure whether to walk away or pretend she hadn't heard. Veronica stepped closer, wineglass in hand, voice sweet and venomous. "You know, Ben is far too kind. My cousin lets just anyone in these days. Back when we were young, help stayed behind the curtains, where they belonged." Someone chuckled. Then the worst happened. Veronica accidentally brushed her glass against Grace's arm, red wine spilling over the cupcakes and down Grace's dress. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said, smiling like a knife. "Clumsy me." Gasps. Laughter. Grace looked down at the stains. The stars had melted. Her heart did too. She stood there for a second too long, surrounded by glittering guests and echoing cruelty. Then she turned, trying to disappear down the hallway, her face hot, her throat tight, her dignity unraveling. She thought it would end there. But humiliation, like a storm, rarely stops after the first crack of thunder. Grace locked herself in the staff bathroom and turned on the faucet, not to wash, but to drown the sound of her breath breaking. Her uniform was soaked in wine. The cupcakes she'd spent the morning decorating were a soggy ruin in the trash. She pressed a paper towel to her chest, not to clean the stain, but to hold herself together. Outside, laughter kept flowing. Music played. Noah was somewhere in that sea of faces, and she couldn't go to him. She wasn't family. She wasn't anything. A soft knock at the door startled her. It was another kitchen worker. "They're asking for the cake," she said gently. "Mr. Crawford wants it brought out now." Grace nodded. Her voice wouldn't work, but her body knew the drill. She pulled herself together the way she'd done 1,000 times before. Straighten the spine, wipe the tears, quiet the heart. Minutes later, she stood near the back of the ballroom, barely visible, as Benjamin Crawford stood beside a towering cake shaped like a spaceship, Noah's current obsession. The crowd gathered, phones out. Grace stayed hidden behind a floral arch, just close enough to see. Benjamin gave a short speech about his son, charming, polished, impersonal. He thanked the guests, praised the decorators, the event planner, even the florist, but not Grace. Not a single word for the woman who had kissed Noah's scraped knees, memorized his favorite bedtime story, and held his hand through fevers. Then she saw Veronica whispering to Benjamin. He laughed politely, shaking his head, but then he glanced toward the kitchen, at her. Their eyes met, briefly, and he looked away. That tiny movement shattered her. He knew, he had heard, he had seen, and he turned his face from hers. She backed away slowly, her chest aching. In that moment she knew it was over. Maybe they would fire her tonight. Maybe she wouldn't even get to say goodbye. She reached the hallway near the service entrance and leaned against the wall, letting the quiet wrap around her like a punishment. It was always like this. She got too close. She hoped too much. And then reality came for her like a slow, cruel wave. She thought about running. Packing up the tiny room in the basement they let her sleep in, leaving before they could push her out. Her eyes closed, her hands trembled. She whispered, barely audible, "I'm sorry, baby." Then came the sound she didn't expect. A gasp. A child's voice. Footsteps running, and then a sudden sharp silence in the ballroom. Someone had shouted something that didn't make sense, something that made her heart stop cold. "And what about you? Have you ever stayed silent just to protect someone, even when it hurt? Have you ever loved quietly in the background, hoping they'd feel it anyway? Tell me in the comments, because sometimes your story might be exactly what someone else needs to gather the courage to speak up." Grace didn't move. The hallway felt frozen in time. She could hear footsteps rushing past, hushed voices, someone calling Benjamin's name, but she stayed still, back against the wall, afraid to breathe. Then she saw it, something small on the floor, folded, a little crumpled, a drawing. She picked it up slowly. Crayon lines, a house, a woman holding hands with a child under a blue sky. In Noah's handwriting at the top, the words, "Me and Mommy." Grace's hands began to shake. She had seen him draw dozens of pictures, but he'd always labeled her Gracie. This one was different. She turned the paper over. There, scribbled in green, "Don't be sad, Mommy, I remember." Her knees gave out. She sat on the floor, hugging the drawing to her chest, tears running silently down her cheeks. He knew. He always knew. Not because anyone told him, but because love like that doesn't lie. It lives in the lullabies, in the way you cut apples the way he likes, in the arms that always feel like home. A door creaked open at the end of the hallway. Noah stood there. He didn't speak, just walked toward her, tiny steps on polished floor. Then he knelt down, touched her hand gently and whispered, "I saw them laugh at you. I didn't like it." She tried to smile. "I'm okay, sweetie. It's just a little spilled juice." "No, it's not," he said. "You're sad. Like when I was sick and you cried at night, I saw you." Her breath caught. He'd seen more than she ever wanted. He leaned closer. "I don't want you to be a secret anymore." Grace swallowed the lump in her throat. She didn't know what would happen. She didn't know if Benjamin would fire her, but for the first time she didn't care. She took Noah's hand and whispered back, "Then maybe it's time I stop hiding." The air inside the ballroom was dense with curiosity. Guests whispered. Cameras shifted focus. Noah was missing from the cake photos, and Benjamin Crawford was starting to notice. Grace stepped out of the hallway holding Noah's hand, her dress still stained, her eyes still red. But she walked differently now, not faster, not smaller, just honest. They passed a group of waiters. One gave her a respectful nod. Another looked away. Veronica, sipping champagne again, smirked. Looks like the help found her moment. Grace didn't respond. She kept walking. Back near the dessert table, Noah pulled on her sleeve. "Do we have to keep it secret forever?" Grace crouched down beside him, voice low. "I don't know what your dad will say, baby, but it's true," Noah said. "You're my mom. I don't care what they think." She looked at him, 1,000 emotions fighting behind her eyes. "Even if it means people talk, even if it gets messy." He nodded. "You were always there. I know who you are." It wasn't a speech. It wasn't grand, but it broke something open inside her. The dam she'd built for years began to leak. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but today her son had chosen her. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to be chosen back. An hour later, Grace stood alone near the kitchen, staring at a silver serving cart that needed no attention. She'd told Noah to find his father. It was time, but the weight of it all pressed hard against her chest. What if Benjamin said she was crazy? What if he called the police? What if she lost Noah forever? She touched the folded drawing still hidden in her apron pocket. "Don't be sad, Mommy. I remember." Even that love felt fragile now, like a paper bridge over fire. Then she heard voices. "It's unacceptable," Veronica was saying behind the wall. "That woman is crossing boundaries. This is a party, not a charity case." Benjamin's voice was harder to read. "I don't want drama right now. She's embarrassing you, and that boy clearly sees her as more than a nanny. It's manipulative." Then silence. Grace turned to go, but stopped when she saw something. A security guard heading toward her with a headset on. He looked uncomfortable. "Miss Holloway, Mr. Crawford wants to speak with you, alone." Grace nodded. Every step toward that conversation felt like walking into a storm, but she didn't flinch. Until, suddenly, behind her, she heard it again. The same small voice from the center of the ballroom, this time louder, clearer. "She's my mom!" And the room fell into silence. "She's my mom!" The room froze. Noah stood on top of one of the velvet-backed chairs, fists clenched at his sides, voice shaking but loud enough to echo across the grand hall. Every guest stopped mid-bite, mid-sip, mid-thought. Benjamin Crawford turned sharply from a group of investors, his eyes wide, disbelief written across his face. Veronica choked on her drink. What did he just say? Noah didn't back down. "I said Grace is my mum, not a babysitter, not a maid. She's my mum." Gasps rolled through the crowd like distant thunder. Grace stood completely still, her face pale, lips parted. The blood rushed to her ears so loudly she could barely hear anything else. She wanted to run. She wanted to melt into the floor. But then Benjamin stepped forward, slowly. His voice calm, too calm. "Noah, come here." The boy climbed down and walked straight to him, chin lifted like a tiny soldier. Benjamin crouched. "Where did you hear that, son?" Noah pointed behind him. "She didn't tell me. I always knew. I just know." Benjamin turned his gaze to Grace. It wasn't angry. It wasn't kind either. It was searching, desperate for a truth he wasn't sure he wanted to find. He straightened up, looked around the room, then took a deep breath. "Everyone, give us a moment." Whispers erupted. Cameras flashed, but no one moved until Benjamin raised a hand. "Now!" The music cut. Guests awkwardly scattered toward the far side of the ballroom. Benjamin looked at Grace, now trembling slightly, and gestured toward the library. They entered in silence, Noah trailing behind, still holding the drawing in his hand. Inside, with the heavy doors closed, Benjamin spoke first. "I'm going to ask once, and I need the truth." Grace nodded slowly. "Okay." He looked at Noah, then back at her. "Are you his biological mother?" She didn't speak right away. She couldn't. Her hands were fists at her sides. "Yes," she finally whispered. "I was young, alone. I signed him away. I didn't even know who adopted him until years later. When I saw him here, I took the job just to be close." Benjamin sat heavily on the leather couch. "You've been here all this time. Why not say something?" Grace's voice cracked. "Because you're his father. Because you have everything, and I had nothing. I didn't want to take him from you. I just wanted to be near." Noah tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad, I don't want her to go." Benjamin stared at the boy, then at Grace, then at the picture in Noah's hand. "She sang to me when I had nightmares," Noah added. "She makes my lunch better than anyone. She knows when I'm sad, even if I don't say it." Benjamin swallowed hard. The silence stretched. Then, finally, he stood and walked toward Grace. "I don't know what to do with all of this," he said honestly, "but I know one thing." He looked at Noah. "This boy loves you more than I've ever seen him love anyone." He turned to Grace. His voice softened. "And that has to mean something." From outside the room, murmurs still buzzed, but inside, for the first time, the three of them stood together. Not perfectly, not painlessly, but finally, honestly. The next morning, the mansion was quiet. The balloons had deflated. The guests were gone. And for the first time in years, Grace Holloway stood in the sunlit kitchen with nothing in her hands. She wasn't chopping vegetables. She wasn't washing dishes. She was just standing there, breathing. Benjamin entered, still in yesterday's shirt, eyes tired. "I cancelled today's meetings," he said, like it mattered. Grace gave a small nod. "I was going to pack my things." He shook his head. "No, you're not going anywhere." They stood in silence. "I don't know what happens next," he added, "but I know he needs you. And maybe so do I." Later, as Grace sat on the back porch with Noah asleep beside her, she looked out at the garden he used to run through as a toddler. The same garden she used to watch from the kitchen window. She ran her fingers through his hair, kissed the top of his head. She hadn't claimed him to the world. He had claimed her. That changed everything. Because family isn't always made in hospitals or courtrooms. Sometimes it's built quietly, in bedtime stories, school pickups, and scraped knees. Grace never asked to be recognized. She just wanted to love him. And in the end, that love spoke louder than blood, louder than shame, louder than silence. Maybe you've had someone like Grace in your life, someone who loved you quietly, without asking for credit. A teacher, a neighbor, a step-parent, a caregiver, someone who gave you everything, not because they had to, but because they chose to. If this story touched something in you, leave a comment below. Tell us who your Grace was, or maybe who you've been that for. because sometimes your words might be the hug someone else is waiting for today. And if you believe in second chances, in the kind of love that doesn't need a name to be real, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We have so many more stories to tell, stories about people who love in silence and finally get the voice they always deserved.